Welcome back then, and you've just watched that little short video there on micro behaviours. Gives good examples of how people's attitude and behaviour is affected or impacted by other people. If only we had all those little bubbles appearing above our heads telling us or letting us recognise, no, maybe not such a good idea. But you get the idea. By reading people's emotions, recognising how they're reacting to our behaviours and managing the situation, we shouldn't really get in a situation like that. And people might take more time to think about why they're in that situation, why they're letting other people's attitude affect their behaviour, etc. And we're going to look at that because that's part of emotional intelligence theory. We'll look at the basics and then we'll examine a couple of models. But first, I just want to talk about the basics of emotional triggers and why we are triggered so much by our emotions and we're not always aware of the actions or the behaviours that we're displaying. Being self-aware is about recognising those triggers so that therefore we know what those behaviours that we might be displaying that are associated with those emotions will be, and importantly the impact they may be having on other people. So let's think about why we have emotional triggers. So emotional triggers are a key part of that reaction we're talking about, how we react to other people's attitude and behaviours. And we've already discussed in the talk about the saboteurs that we've got, our internal saboteurs, how the brain plays an important part in that. Because our brains are amazing, we still don't fully understand them, but they control our rationalisation, our behaviours, and we get some sort of stimulus and we react. Our brain concocts a reason for a reaction based on our values or experience. It's trying to protect us, or it's our amygdala, which they say is a deep centered part of our brain which gives us that fight or flight response when there's a conflict or a danger or a situation, and it justifies it for us and we come out with a response. And whether it makes sense or not, our self-deception, whatever it is, we don't even realise it's happened, but it shows in our body language and what we say and what we do. We talked about our behaviours. The rationalisation is that it's automated and it's so quick that we don't even recognise that it occurs. And that's why we need to be self-aware and we need to start thinking about these things, because otherwise we don't even know that we're displaying these behaviours, and we're not even going to be aware that we might be causing a reaction. Because it's so easy for us to justify what happens. It's easy, it's natural to say it's down to our emotions, the four being fear, basic ones being fear, anger, sadness and happiness. Our brain justifies. For example, you've lost a report that you're trying to get done that you're working on, and you blame your company for giving you a untidy office with not enough storage space, or the cleaners moved it, or your boss for giving you the stupid task in the first place, or a tight deadline. And it's easy for you to just ignore the fact that you're tired, you haven't been getting enough sleep, or you went out last night, that your patience is thin due to other pressures, perhaps home life, the fact that you agreed to the deadline in the first place and didn't put up a fight, or that you're just generally unhappy, or you left it till the last minute and you haven't prepared. They're easy to put aside and you just find justification of blaming someone else and using your anger. And we need to be aware of all these emotions and we need to manage them. We can't necessarily change them, but we can manage them. As we've seen in Batari's box, it is really important because our emotions, which is part of our attitude, will affect our behaviour and then will affect everyone else and put a pressure on everyone else, and they'll react and it'll have an impact on our colleagues, our team and our relationships. And it isn't easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but there are some simple steps that we can use that are recognised to deal with our emotions and our triggers. And when I say recognised, these are psychologists who've come up with these. So, quickly look at 5 steps that have been identified for controlling your emotions, the triggers. And that's before we start looking at the theory on emotional intelligence, which this is part of. But the first is being able to accept responsibility for your reactions. Accepting that you're powerful enough to control your emotions instead of saying your emotions are controlling you and using them as an excuse, categorising yourself as a victim of your emotions, removing that self-deception, so taking control. First point of that is identifying what is triggering our emotions and how we feel at the time they're triggered. And if we can do that and get some clarity, then we can take control and decide to change the circumstances. If we're in control, we can change our reactions, which will impact on other people's reactions. Choosing to do it rather than being pushed or just reacting and using it as an excuse. The suggestion is that we can develop this further, and it does take practice, but we'll be looking at identifying those triggers first. But first, we've got to say we're going to do something about it. We're going to take responsibility for our reactions and not use it as a crutch to say, oh, it's our emotions. And once we've taken responsibility and we accept that we can do something about it, the next thing is to recognise when we're having that reaction. So recognise when that emotion is starting, the signs in our body. No matter what we accept about our emotions, if we can't recognise some little signs that we're feeling as these things start to change, we're not going to be able to take any action or reaction to them, and it is going to impact on our relationships, our job performance, our overall happiness. Eminent neuroscientists have said that we need to recognise things such as, I don't know, you start sweating, or your breathing rate changes, or your blood flow, or tension, or it could be as simple as with me, sometimes it's a thought just pops into my head like, oh, here we go again, and I have to recognise that and change my mentality, because the sooner we recognise it, the more chance we've got of recognising those patterns and starting to identify the links and start to control it better, which is what we're talking about. As soon as we see it, we've got to try and take control of it. The first thing is to recognise those triggers so we know when it's happening. And the third step, very important, is when we're determining what triggered that emotion. If the sooner we recognise that we're having that emotion in step 2, the quicker we can identify if it is going to be a problem. So is it going to cause an underperformance in us? Are we going to get stressed, frustrated, or is it going to cause an impact on negative reaction on others? And purely the fact that we've taken that moment to try and determine what it is often is enough, sort of that we're self-aware of it, that it stops it and gives us that time to think. It's stopping our brain doing that automatic reaction. We're beating it to that subconscious reaction. But the sort of things you can be asking yourself are, what do I hold dear and why? What values is it that I've got, but I find it hard to accept when other people are breaking them or not meeting them? And why do I overreact? Now, we may not think it's an issue or a big thing, the way we've reacted. We may think we've not shown our emotions, but what about others? Have they seen it? Did they think that something was different? And we might think, oh, we're not showing it, we've hidden it well. But probably not, because it's an automatic reaction. Step 4 is about being able to choose when and what you want to do, what you want to feel, what you want to do about that trigger. Because it's happened, it's now important what you do with it. We can practice to control our emotions and to react to our triggers. You don't want to stop the emotion or the trait, because that's what makes you you. But what you want to do is recognise it and allow yourself the time to quickly identify it and decide what you want to do or say next. So ask yourself things such as, are you letting someone or something else determine your actions? They're taking control, or it's taking control by causing a reaction, and maybe they're doing that to provoke that reaction. Is the person actively doing something against or to you, or are you taking the situation too personally? Maybe it's stresses of your own that are making it seem personal. If it's true that someone is deliberately ignoring or blocking you from achieving something, you can react as they expect you to, or you could maybe try and do something different. Can you leave it for now? Would it mean that you were taking control if you decided to deal with it later? So it's about determining and taking control of what you'll do with that emotion. And finally, it's about being able to actively shift your emotional state. So it's about changing things. It takes practice in different times and in different situations. So when you first notice that reaction in step 2, you need to think about what your normal triggers would be and what your normal reactions would be. And then you need to think about step 4 and think about choosing something different and changing your emotion by taking control. And we go back to the mental state, or the perceptive intelligence, PQ, that the man talked about in the Saboteurs video. This is the point where you take control. Remember, relax. breathe, release the tension, maybe distract yourself and refocus on something else. And as because already we have identified, this is not easy. I'm not just saying, right, there's 5 steps, you can do it, it's all sorted. And in fact, you can do a little activity in a minute where you're going to try and identify those triggers. And it's not easy, especially when your brain takes control with that amygdala or those subconscious thoughts, because you're busy, you're under pressure at work, and it's just hard. It takes practice, but the massive rewards you can get from this, if you can learn to control it and you can take control, it can be massive in improving your well-being, your performance at work, and also your relationships outside and inside work, and it can make a massive difference. So we're going to look at an activity where you're going to be asked to identify, you're going to be asked to do some of those stages. You're going to be asked to identify some of the triggers and think what you could do with them and what your reactions might be, and things you could do to sort of change things. So it takes some self-awareness and some honesty to start thinking about what might trigger, and they're going to be different for everyone. Some it's going to be about anger situations, some it's just going to be about disregarding people's opinions because of the way they've said something, and you think, and your reaction is, I can't bother with this person. So whatever it is for your triggers, they'll be personal for you, but do the activity and upload it, and then when we come back in the next section we'll be starting to look at emotional intelligence.